The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Alec McCutcheon. I'm from Unicom. We're delighted to be hosting today's discussion webinar. Just to give you a little bit of background, Unicom is a global conference and education company, and we're currently partnering with our friends at Australia New Zealand Testing Board, ANZTB, and we've been collaborating on two fronts. One is in organising today's webinar. Also, we're delighted that ANZTB are supporting a conference we're hosting in Melbourne on the 28th of August, the Agile Testing and DevOps Showcase. You can probably see the icon for it on the holding slide. In fact, one of our panelists, or two of our panelists today, will be at the conference in August. David Fuller is going to be presenting one of the keynotes, and also Veronica Belcher will be there. ANZTB are going to be having a stand at the event, so Veronica will be there as well. So hopefully some of you will get an opportunity to meet them in Melbourne next month. In the meantime, I'll tell you a little bit of background about today's webinar. It's going to take the form of really like a fireside chat. It's talking about a scenario in which Agile and DevOps has been implemented, tailored and used in two big organisations, one in the private sector and one in the public sector. And as I mentioned, there are three panellists. Our moderator today, who's going to be keeping things in order, is David Hayman. David's a very long-term friend of Unicom. I knew David first about, must have been 15, 20 years ago when he lived back in sunny London. He moved to New Zealand, and we're very pleased to be working with him again now as chair of the ANZTB. And joining David, of course, David Fuller and Veronica Belcher, who are also members of the board of ANZTB. Just one final housekeeping item to mention. At the end of the webinar, afterwards, we'll be sending a link. So if you want to share a recording and hear the webinar again or share with your colleagues, you'll be most welcome. So without further ado, I am now going to hand over to David to start it running. David, over to you.
Thank you, Alec. It's a great introduction, and I think it's covered everything that we need to talk about. We'll try and keep it sort of light-hearted and sort of chatty and stuff like that. A number of people have sent in questions that we'll try and sort of pick up as we go through. But I'll start with a general sort of question to both the panelists, and just sort of ask, who were the key players in the introduction of DevOps in your company or department? And how did that list of players evolve as roles became clearer?
Ladies first, so Veronica, over to you.
Oh, thank you, David. Well, I've worked in both state and Commonwealth government organisations, and have found that in projects it's a lot easier to implement new approaches such as these. But when it comes to business as usual, it's not as easy bringing staff along on the journey and encouraging them to take up new ways of working, because it's difficult to break out of the "we've always done it this way" cycle. Government departments are usually also impacted by the cost of tools and ongoing licensing, which needs to be factored in their budgets to enable a successful transition into business as usual moving forward. So from a point of view of a government agency or a government department, it's not always easy for things such as DevOps to be incorporated into their daily work. But in saying that, I've just finished up on a project, and they were starting to integrate DevOps into their way of working. But when it moves over to business as usual, that experience is going to be lost. So it's not an easy thing to do when you've got the government.
And I work for one of the large four banks in Australia, and we're just in the process of enabling our tools for enterprise consumption. So at this early stage, we've sort of got minimal uptake of continuous integration, continuous deployment throughout the major programs, but we're working with all of the different silos we have in our organization to let them understand, what is available for them at different points in time, and adjusting or adjusting and enabling their processes so that they can enable those tools to, get better quality outcomes much earlier. Dave?
Okay. There's a couple of sort of associated questions that have come in, and I'll run those by you and see what your thoughts are. It seems to be a bit of a theme, if you like, that people are working in organisations where they don't have pure waterfall, they don't have pure agile, they have hybrid technologies, and the question is, how do we handle those hybrid technology projects or hybrid technology organisations?
Planning, I reckon. I reckon planning is the key, and you've got to have a lot of expertise on your side so that it can be successful.
And we want to.
Sorry, Dave.
No, that's all right. We want to make sure that I'm from an enterprise testing organisation that spans the enterprise, and we want to be involved in the conscious initiation discussions for all projects so that we can ensure that we're addressing quality early, that we're making people aware of what opportunities there are for them for enablement of both agile and different DevOps capabilities. So it's all about the collaboration, the discussion, and as Ronnie said, the planning to make sure that we're all successful and we're all on the same page with what we can do from very early on. Dave?
Cool. Yeah, that's great. Thanks. There's a question here that's talking about. It says Agile. It was suitable for small organisations. What are the things to avoid for effective Agile approach?
Well, I wouldn't say avoid, I'd say enable, really. One of the things that we've learned where I work is that, the big room planning days where you've got everybody in attendance, where you can cut through all your risks and issues very, very early on, can be a major success factor in enabling you on that Agile journey. So it's all about having everybody in the room, having everybody present so that, you don't waste a whole lot of time trying to cut through all your questions and interdependencies. And one of the big things that we realized as a success factor was that by having 160 people in a room on your PI planning days, we actually cut down probably a 2 or 3 month process of working through all those issues into 1 or 2 days, and that was something that we've fully embraced over the past few years very successfully.
Everyone needs the opportunity to speak when you're in those big meetings.
That's right. Yes.
There's a one of the attendees. Thank you for the question. The question is, who is most resistant to DevOps? Is it the dev team or the ops team, and why? Because obviously testers are not resistant to anything. We're very compliant people. We'll do what we're told. But the other two of the three amigos, who have you found has been most resistant?
Probably the project teams themselves, because they haven't budgeted for it, both budgeted in times of their additional effort and the additional cost. They don't think about the productivity benefits of putting some of the new processes in place. So again, going back to the conscious initiation discussions, it's very important to make people understand what the pros and cons are of each of the options available to them.
Yeah, from my experience, I've found that it's the ops side of the fence that are the most resistant, because when they can't see the value in it for them as much as we can as testers and the dev people can as developers. You know, the ops teams, they're not seeing the same, I guess, value for money that we are.
How do we handle that? How do we get that message back?
I guess you've got to, you really have to educate and involve them in right from the beginning, as David said before about your planning days. You've got to get them on.
Yeah. So it's a collaborative approach.
Yeah, it needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's essential, Dave. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a great point, well made. Thank you. Change the tack a little bit. How much, if anything, did the move to an agile methodology drive or impact DevOps? So I think what's been asked here is, was what came first, the chicken or the egg, the agile or the DevOps?
I think, you know, as part of agile, we all want to shift left. We all want to do things a lot earlier, and having an understanding of what DevOps can bring to the table is essential in driving, you know, that ability to be able to deliver, you know, earlier value to the customer. All right. So with, you know, continuous integration, continuous deployment, the faster feedback loops that we can have enables that ability for us to deliver quicker and better outcomes for our customers. So definitely agile from where I am standing in my organization, but you know, DevOps is the natural next step in enabling that ability.
Are you an in-house development shop, David Fuller?
Most definitely not. We have a number of partners. We have a number of third-party providers. You know, I'd probably say 80% of our projects need to be hybrid based on that. But whatever we can do agile within our organization, we do. And then we manage the interdependencies of that through system teams and through really good release planning, really.
Yeah, because I've found that with the government, we've got to get buy-in from the vendor for these type of methodologies. And if the vendors aren't used to that way of working, it's hard to get them to I guess, adapt to what we need. But in saying that, once they come on board, once they've delivered an off-the-shelf product, for us to assure it, we can take a DevOps approach. You know, there might be customizations that need to be done, which is fine, and we can take a continuous integration approach to that.
And look, I'm not saying we're perfect. We still have struggles today. So it's all about continuous improvement, looking at the new ways of working, looking at how we ourselves, you know, inspect and adapt and grow our skills over time as well.
I think the standard sort of reply applies here is that agile and DevOps is not a one size fits all. It's very much a work in progress, and everybody has their own opportunities and their own requirements and everything else. There's an interesting question just popped up and says, can DevOps be delivered in an onshore offshore model? Given how closely and collaboratively agile teams have to work, I'd be interested in your thoughts, even if you haven't done it.
Well, as I said, we use multiple partners, so you know, we're a global delivery organization. You know, we work through, you know, India, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand. We have, you know, multiple offices across the globe that are all involved in our project delivery. So again, it's all about the collaboration across your team, setting the early expectations, and having the right collaboration tools and processes in place so that you can all effectively, communicate as well.
Yeah, one of the companies I previously worked for, the big constraint we had was the time difference. That's all. We worked with in an agile methodology really well because we're all on the same page.
Great. I think that sort of covers that. The answer is yes. You just have to flex a bit.
That's it.
A couple of other sort of aside questions. What's the role of manual functional testing in DevOps environment? How has it changed from, I'm assuming, how has it changed from a waterfall environment?
I'd say it's more exciting for a manual tester.
Excitement is always good, but too much excitement can be a bad thing.
They get involved early, and then it gives them the opportunity to really feel like they're making a difference right from the word go.
And one of the things that we found too is that, it gives them that opportunity to expand their skill sets as well. So, in Agile, one of the big focuses for us is, developing those T-shaped skills. So people within an Agile team, if you're traditionally from a testing background, it's giving you that opportunity to also, look at an analysis side of things, the engineering side, the engineering opportunity, sorry. But also as well, let's look at what we can bring to the table from behavioral driven development and test driven development, and how can we influence the developers to do things different, shift left, and address quality earlier in the life cycle.
It gives the manual tester an exposure to an area that they've not previously been exposed to before, and it's all about getting experience. They can get involved in automation from an early stage as well. If they haven't done it before, then it's valuable for them for their career as well.
That's
great. We've even
sorry.
No, I was going to say I've even seen people from traditionally a testing background moving into Scrum Master and product owner or service owner roles through their exposure and expanding their skill sets within those Agile teams.
You've both very succinctly answered another question that's already come in earlier today, and that said, what roles can a functional manual test analyst transition into in the DevOps world? And I think you've pretty much summed it up by saying anything you want, really.
Yeah. I
think the point you make about being in that environment gives you that exposure to those other roles is it gives much more opportunity for people to understand where those roles fit in rather than seeing them from a distance.
That's right. Yeah, and that helps the whole team then. Everyone feels included. They don't feel excluded from the delivery of the project as a whole.
Fantastic. Okay. Here's a short, snappy one that might generate some conversation. At what stage of the process, and I assume that process means the move to DevOps, was the test practice fully included? At the start, in the middle, not yet?
So the rollout of DevOps is part of our environment team, if you want to call it, if I can just call it that, within my organization. So it's been very fundamental for the testing enterprise to understand the capabilities that are available to it so that we can, adjust our processes early, so that when we go and talk to our project teams and businesses, that we can bring them along on that journey. So again, going back to it, it's integral to having those very early discussions on the opportunities, because if you leave it until too late, the willingness and the ability of those teams to uptake those processes, it's not very successful.
Okay, fair enough. Veronica, do you want to add anything, or are you happy to let that one run?
I'll let that one go. That can go through to the keeper.
Did you have any thoughts, Dave? What about yourself?
I have lots of thoughts on this, but I'll carry on moderating at the moment because I don't want to upset anybody. Just an interesting question that's just popped up, and my immediate response was, I don't think there is any difference, but you guys might be able to tell me, because you work, say, with outsourced vendors and outsourced infrastructure, I guess. It says, how does the testing strategy in DevOps differ if infrastructure is in the cloud compared to on-premise? My immediate response was, it doesn't differ at all, really. It's the same approach. It's just the infrastructure's in a different place, or the code.
That's right. You know, there's everything that a test strategy is required to have in it will still be the same. It's just the information, the approach that you're going to take.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that.
I think one of the things that we've experienced and learnt by is that where you've got interdependencies on external service providers, so, you know, whoever's hosting in the cloud, is to understand what their capability and engagement processes are. So, you know, where we may have done things in-house and had complete ownership and control over that, and expectations, sorry, over that previously, when we move to a cloud facility, those things can be quite different. So, you know, understanding what availability and cost means in a cloud, as well as capability. It's not always a one-to-one relationship. So it's good to have that understanding very early on so that you can set the right strategy and set the right roles and responsibilities so that you can be successful.
Yeah, I think an understanding of how the cloud fits into the whole structure is important.
Good stuff. Yep, happy to work with that one. The discussion that we had just now about T-shaped people and what can we do and what do testers do and what can they transition to seems to have generated a bit of conversation. And I've got a few questions here. The root, I guess, is what changes to skill sets were required and how did you bring your team up to speed in what are essentially T-shaped roles? On top of that, it's sort of, you know, what are the testers' responsibilities in the DevOps world? What are the key challenges you're seeing for testers in the Agile DevOps environment? Tips for manual and automation testers to fit into a devs team. How will their roles change? I think it's probably worth spending a little bit more time on that. It seems to be the key concern or sort of area where advice is being sought.
Yeah, from my perspective, I've in a lot of areas that I've worked in government, they seem to prefer to employ consultants on a short-term basis to upskill their staff. So, you know, if you're implementing an automation tool, get a consultant or two in just to train the existing testers, because you'll often find that the testers, everyone started off as a manual tester. So if you want to expand, it's not always easy to upskill yourself unless you get a bit of assistance. So that's what I've found, yeah, in the government. You know, they're usually the consultant's brief is to, you know, make sure that they hand over their information and their experience to the staff moving forward.
Did that include things like Agile coaches and DevOps coaches and things like that?
Yeah. Yeah, because you've got all that information, for all that I guess experience just isn't in the government. You know, you've got public servants, and not saying that there's anything wrong with public servants, because there's a lot of them that are very skilled, but bringing in new technologies requires a different outlook, and things like shifting left, you can't just move forward with that without any assistance. And to be able to do it properly, I think the introduction of, on a short-term basis, of consultants is valuable. It's money well spent.
David, from a corporate perspective who don't like spending money, what's your view?
Oh, I've got to be careful how I answer that one, but I'll shift over to the transition side of it. Okay, so look, we're going through a very large agile transformation at the moment, and you know, within our application development community, we've probably got about 157, I think the number is, different role titles, and we're trying to collapse that down to about 9. All right. You know, Scrum Master, Product Owner, Engineer, Service Integration Managers, etc. So a large population of those 157 roles are all going to fall into the engineer category. Now, you know, we'll have some testers, business analysts, architects, developers, all falling into that title. And some of the feedback that we've got from those people is that, you know, well, this doesn't sound like what I used to do. I'm not really happy with you calling me that. So, you know, what we've had to go through and explain to these people is, well, as part of being an engineer, it also opens the opportunities for you to be able to look at these other things. So, you know, as a developer, you know, what can you bring to the table in as far as, you know, shift left, improving quality? Can you start looking at adopting some BDD or TDD practices in what you do today? You know, when you're looking at code, you know, or at coding, look at more the requirements or the acceptance criteria and the features and the stories to make sure that they're complete enough to enable you to you know, implement what's required. So it's all about expanding the opportunities for those people and let them understand that there's a lot more on the table that they can actually participate in the new world than, you know, than what their role looked like before.
Okay. Veronica, did you want to come back on that, or are you happy?
Yeah, I'm happy.
Okay. All right. There's a few questions coming in. One is about 3 pages long, so I'm just trying to read that as we go. But to move away from a little bit away from that sort of personnel sort of base level, my question is, how did the transition to DevOps impact your test automation approach and tool set? Was it a positive driver, or did it hold you back, or are you now moving into wider automation around things like automated builds, automated acceptance, automated delivery? I've sort of merged a couple of questions together there, but maybe let's go back to the start bit about the change to the automation approach and strategy and tools.
Yeah, from a government perspective with the with projects, it's a lot easier to use an automation tool and to get it working and provide value in your test execution. But the current government organisation I work with, they haven't implemented test automation very well at this stage, and they seem to use quite a number of different testing tools. So it doesn't always, so I guess it doesn't always end well, because you can't move over into BAU when you've got a different test tool or a different automation tool to what the BAU people use. So then you've got to get sort of acceptance of the new tool, or you've got to try and integrate the scripts with the old tool and hope for the best, I think.
Do you think that's a symptom of government departments that, you know, that they are very isolated and they'll buy a tool that works for them but doesn't necessarily integrate with other stuff? Or is it just well, that's what we've got and that's what we'll use approach?
They seem to buy a tool that suitable for the current project that they're doing, but BAU or business as usual team are working either not doing automation or not doing it very well. So with a different tool again, so it's not always easy to I guess move everything to BAU. Either something's got to get dropped, and usually it is automation. So then you go back to the BAU team and you're back in manual testing. It's from a government perspective, automation is pretty new in some areas. Not all areas, because some government departments do it very well. But for the current government department that I'm working in, automation is really quite an unknown quantity.
Do you think the move to DevOps will resolve that, or because of the collaborative approach that everybody's taking?
Yeah, if it's a whole of testing move to DevOps, then it's going to be successful, but it's also going to be a long road to get to see the value.
So Dave, I'd like to expand on that a little bit if I could, and that is I'd like to take the word test out of your question. And in
it's a bit awkward in a testing seminar.
Oh, well, yeah, we're talking about DevOps too. Let's be fair to all that audience. So, like with the adoption of DevOps, the automation is end to end. So it's, you know, right from the very early stages of how can you improve your unit testing, your sprint or your system testing, to enable those faster feedback loops, so that, you know, you can have more of a hands-off approach to the progression of your deliverables throughout the life cycle. So it definitely does have a positive impact, or it is a positive driver, sorry, from your ability to be able to refactor, resolve, and deliver quicker, whether that to be to the, you know, to the customer or to the next stage in the life cycle. So everybody having the understanding of how they can utilize those capabilities to enable that faster feedback, so that everybody can gain the benefits from that. So, you know, from a testing perspective, ensuring that, you know, we set specific benchmarks for progressive automation during sprints that can then be leveraged later on during system integration testing or non-functional testing, can be a huge benefit and eliminate a lot of, you know, duplication and rework in those later phases.
Well, something that always comes out of that is, and the question I get asked an awful lot by the squads I work with, is how do we find time to fit in automation, and I'll add the word test, back in a 2-week sprint?
Well, I have had major success with that, and I sort of set an expectation with a team that I'd like to see 80% progressive automation within the sprint, and people used to say, that's not possible, that's not possible, and it's not about, well, it's not all about today, it's about, you know, let's set an expectation over the course of, you know, of a 2 or a 3 month project increment, and change the mindset of our manual testers or people within the sprint team to start adopting a test-driven development approach, so that, you know, instead of waiting until the code's written and then we write the tests, we're writing the tests before we write the code. We're refactoring the code to pass. We're refactoring the code to pass the tests after they've failed in the first instance. So that we're completely changing the mindset of the people. So I think once you get a few rungs on the board, everybody sees the benefits that that brings. And yeah, you do take a little bit of pain in the beginning, but over 2 or 3 months, you can greatly improve your productivity 20 or 30%.
And those scripts are reusable then, so then you've always got them.
That's right.
I have heard of teams changing the way that they deploy, using ADO or VSTS or Bamboo or whatever it is they're using to deploy, and that basically they make the automated test or suite of, say, smoke tests a mandatory part of the deliverable. So you deliver your code, you deliver your config, you deliver your data changes, and the fourth part of the deliverable now becomes a short suite of smoke tests. And again, I think what's happened is that there's early pain, but once it becomes part of the process, the gain far outweighs it.
Well, within our organisation, we don't allow code to progress until the next environment unless their tests are automated. So it's setting that benchmark, so that people know that it's a mandatory requirement.
See, from a government perspective, you've got to get buy-in from, you know, or get an agreement from management that there is value in that, which is very difficult.
Yeah, I think the underlying message there is there's no gain without pain, but once you establish the value, then everybody's bought in. Okay, what else have I got for you? We've answered a couple of questions there. There's a question just popped up, and it sort of fits into one of the questions that's in the agenda. The agenda message question was, how have you managed to control test environments and test data that requires constant change or being constantly refreshed? And that's the gist of a question that's just come from the floor, for example, asking how do you auto provision and deprovision clean slate testing shells, execution as part of CI, and you know, where should that responsibility sit? Is it an ops requirement? Is it a devs requirement, or is it the QAs who should own those I guess non-production environments and the test data and the mechanism that stands them up, strips them down, and cleans them up? Long question, probably a short answer.
Yeah, I think it's a separate role altogether. An environment manager that has a team that works with them to facilitate the creation of the environments and bringing them down again, populating the data.
Yeah, we have a dedicated environment team within our organisation, but you know, as far as automated provisioning of those environments goes, virtualization is a key capability around that. And that virtualization, as well as going into environments, it can also go into, you know, services and data as well. So again, it's all coming back to those very early collaboration discussions with the teams to understand what the expectations and the needs are, so that you can have the planning in place very early on, so that you can have the right engagement and the right capabilities in place. So, we're very fortunate in that we have quite a mature team there. We haven't got everything in place at the moment, but it's slowly coming along. But it all goes back to the collaboration, the engagement, and the expectation setting, and the planning very early on.
I think that covers off a good part of that question. Just to add another perspective to that is that yes, I believe having a dedicated environment manager is a great way to go. And in the organisation in which I work, we've now designated a test lead who has an operational role rather than a testing role, and that operational role is managing the environments on behalf of all the squads. So it's the same role, just with a slightly different lean. Sorry, I'm just scrolling down a couple of questions here. This was something we touched on earlier, and I think the question's come up a couple of times, and I think it's probably better just to sort of pick up these questions from here. Is somebody's asking how to integrate security testing into a DevOps pipeline, and perhaps we can widen that out a little bit more into the question as to how do you handle non-functional testing requirements across the board within an agile DevOps platform.
So we've actually taken the approach of more of an engineering focus so that we can try and be more preventative than reactive. What we used to see in the waterfall model was that security and other non-functional testing was something that happened very late in the piece, and of course that brings its own challenges. So now we sort of ask the sprint teams and the people that are involved in the DevOps tooling as well, to enable us to be able to do much earlier security testing, or to be able to establish if we can envisage there being issues, rather than waiting till very late in the piece where we're relying on the actual testing outcome to bring that to light. So it's a bit of a hard question, Dave, and every organisation I think is going to be a little bit different there, and I'm probably speaking more from a customer-facing organisation than what others might, be looking at.
Yeah, nobody said the questions were going to be easy.
Oh, I know that. But it's good for 8 o'clock on an Australian evening. So.
From
10 o'clock.
Or 10 o'clock in. Sorry, Ronnie.
Focus. From my perspective, we have a specific area in the government department I'm in that deal with security testing and cyber security testing, and they do an assessment as to whether they need to do any penetration testing or any other sorts of security testing. So if they do the assessment, and it depends on whether it's a customer-facing website or any banking or financial area. So it's all done by another team altogether. So it's sort of out of our scope of things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
okay.
Look, we outsource our security testing as well, but it's also making sure that we've set clear expectations with that partner as well as to what and when we'd like to see from them.
Sounds like a sensible approach. Just a very quick one-line answer from each of you on a question that's just popped up. when do the tests get updated if the team is busy creating new tests in each sprint?
You could update them as you go.
Okay, so what you're
If you're
saying, you
doing it-
include that. So you include that in your velocity, and say,
Yes,
right,
that's right.
part of my scope and my backlog is a standard 2-point or whatever to have time to do that. Okay, that's what fair,
So
fair assumption.
while every project may be different in its own rights, Dave, we ensure that there's very clear definitions of done and definitions of ready defined for each program increment. Now, that may be different depending on the sprint teams and what they're actually delivering, right? But you know, as part of the acceptance criteria for a particular feature or epic, we need to mandate in that the tests, the expectations, and the evidences are all captured to meet that definition of done or that definition of ready for release.
I think that's a very valid point. I think, so we talked about earlier about everything being specific to a particular environment. The definition of done is one that will probably run and run and run. I'm conscious of the time, and we've reached our sort of 45 minutes that was allotted. I've got a couple of quick questions that I'd just like to throw out to wrap it up, and then I'll hand back to the management. This is probably a bit of a philosophical question, really, but how does the existence of DevOps change the software testing world? In 2 lines.
Efficiency.
Yeah, that's one word. That's good.
I was just going to say exactly the same thing. Like with faster feedback, that it enables you to cut through and be more productive.
Yeah, you know, the time to prod is really a lot quicker, and so if you're moving that quickly with your continuous integration and you're keeping the quality up, the customer's going to benefit.
Yeah, well, that segues beautifully into, I think, the last question, which says often regression test suites in complicated environments with multiple integrated applications can take time. How have companies overcome this without unwanted risk, yet still achieve the speed to market? So I think succinctly, it's, as you've just said, yes, this speeds things up and it gives you efficiencies, but how do we do that without exposing unwanted business risk?
One of the factors that we needed to consider was to be a lot more targeted with what our regression was. You know, we have some very large applications, and in case there's anybody listening that will know where I'm from by mentioning this, you know, we used to have a regression test suite in the tens of thousands of test cases. And from a cost and timeliness point of view, it wasn't feasible anymore. So it was taking more of a risk-based approach and going back to our service owners and our product owners and saying, you know, this is all we can do in the time that you have. Help us prioritize what you need. And then take that proactive and continuous approach to having targeted regression.
Great answer.
Yeah, you really need to determine what your most important regression tests are, and then, you know, rank them according to level of importance. You know, if you don't get to the ones that are marked as 3s on your list, it doesn't really matter because you've covered the most critical areas.
I heard a statement the other day, and I thought it was great, well put, that in an agile environment, you need to be risk aware. You can't afford to be risk averse, which basically says you need to know what the risks are, but you haven't got the ability or the time to test to meet every risk. So they need to be made open and everybody understand what they are. but the understanding is that we're only going to test those ones that have as you say, Veronica, a ones and twos, not your threes, fours, and fives.
Yeah, you've got to just determine, have it fit into your sprint time frame. If you can't get to the threes, you might get it till next time. You might get to it the sprint after. It doesn't really matter. You've covered the most important areas.
Cool, thank you. I'm aware that there's a few more questions come through that we haven't got to, and I apologise for that. Hopefully, some of the more wider-based questions we've covered off throughout the discussion and the conversation this evening. I believe you can carry on sending questions through. I'll let the organisers manage that. But from me, thank you for your questions and your feedback and your obvious attention, because your questions reflect that. Thank you to Veronica and David for putting up with my interjections and for their great responses. And I'll hand you back to Alec at Unicom.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, David, Veronica and David. That's a great discussion. I think covered a lot of ground there. Thank you. Just a very brief reminder, if you'd like to know any more about Unicom or ANZTV, you'll see on the holding side we've got the website addresses up there, anztv.org and unicom.co.uk. Likewise, the conference Agile Testing and DevOps Showcase in Melbourne, Australia is on 28th of August, and there's information up on the website. There's also a discount for ANZTV contacts. I'll let you into a secret. If you put the code ANZTV20 when registering, you get a 20% discount. We'll send you a link afterwards, as I mentioned earlier, with the recording of the presentation. It usually takes a few days, so we may not send it immediately. It takes 3 or 4 days, and we'll send a link to the recording, so you're very welcome to share with your colleagues and of course listen in again. Again, thank you everybody for joining us. Goodbye.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.